pattern is composed of 8 steps, and I'll try to have those steps laid out and visible beside this video. So step 1 is a front tie on the right side of the frame. Front ties, we always cross over the main line. So I go over the main line, down in front of the main line, and come back up here to the rear of the main line. So I wrapped the main line, going over the front and back up to the rear of the main line. And when I came back up, I came up to the left here of this previous strand. Not out here to the right, but here to the left. And front ties, you'll start to get familiar with this as we go. The front ties always commence to the left. So every step of this front tie is going to come out to the left of the previous step. And I can pull that nice and snug. And then I'll come up, I'll go over the front crossbar, keep going underneath the crossbar, and come underneath this main line. You'll see that my line wants to slip here to the middle. That's okay. The next step in the process is going to pull it back out to the right side. And that's one of the beauties of the weave, is that as it progresses, it helps to push things into the right spot. So I've gone over the crossbar, under the main line. I'll go back over the crossbar a second time, and then I'll stop there underneath the crossbar. I want this first front tie to be out here on the right side of the frame. So I'll push it back out over that way. It's hard to get it really tight to the right side, and that's okay if it's not perfectly on that line. Now, the important thing here, for most of this weave, we want to pull really tight. Up here at the front is the only space we don't want to pull really tight. If we do pull really tight, I'll show you what happens. You can see my main line here is getting deflected towards the front, and that's what I talked about during setup, is that before you know it, if you start deflecting this, you're not going to have any room for your toes here anymore. So I pull it just tight enough that I see it deflect the line a little bit, and then I back it off. I want this main line to run perfectly straight, so I don't want any deflection. So I back it off so that the line is running nice and straight, and then I'll put a clamp here on the front crossbar, and now I can relax. Every time we put a clamp on the snowshoe frame, we're going to relax our hands, otherwise you're going to get really tired. So my front tie is almost done. I'm just going to do some wraps of the front tie here. So I've come up to the left of the front tie, I'll go down to the right. Come back up to the left, go down to the right. So I'm spiraling. Pull all that through so you can see it. I'm running some spirals down the front tie. So I've gone down to the right, up to the left, down to the right, up to the left. I'll go down to the right again. And on my third one, when I come back up, I want you to come back up in this triangle here. So actually to the rear of this main line. So I come up to the rear of the main line, and then I will finish off my front tie by wrapping the main line once more. So I'll go over the main line and back under the main line. And when I come up, I'm coming up to the left of all of my previous work. So as I said for the front tie, every step, every time I hit this main line, it should be to the left of the previous time I hit that main line. That is step 1 of 8. That's one front tie completed. Step 2 in the pattern is to come to, so that was a front tie right, step 1. Step 2 is a Larks Head right. And by doing a Larks Head, you can see my front tie still wants to slide here towards the middle of the frame, but as I do that Larks Head to the right, that's going to pull it and straighten it out and lock it in the right position. So the Larks Head, you can review that in the previous video, or I'll do it again quickly here. I'm going to go over the frame, under the frame. I'll come up over the fish line, go back under the frame. I'm holding on to that piece of fish line where it made a cross, and I will go under the fish line at that point. So as I've tied this Lark's Head, I haven't bothered to pull it tight. I've just got the fish line into the right position for the knot. I can pull it tight after, so I'll proceed to do that now. Pull it tight and then pull the rest of the line through, and this should be on your first intermediate tick, so 1 inch back from the primary tick. As soon as we tie a Lark's Head, we're going to get a clamp on it and take a break. We can also tuck this bit from our first knot in to that Lark's Head to start getting it out of the way. We did a front tie right, step 1, Lark's Head right, step 2, and now we'll come over Lark's Head left will be step 3. There's a lot of different principles to snowshoe weaving. It can start to seem complex at first, but as I repeat it here, it will start to make more sense. So we talk about types of different strands. You can see that this strand here runs up and to the right, and this strand here runs up and to the left. They're not parallel, so we consider them different types of strands. If I had 2 or 3 lines all running parallel to each other up and to the right, I'd consider them all the same type of strand, and I'd treat them all the same way. In this case, as I move from the right side of the frame to the left side of the frame, I'll only encounter 2 strands, and they're different. We'll always treat different strands differently, and we always go over the first type we encounter and under the second type. So I'm going to go over this first strand, under this second strand, and then I'll tie a Lark's Head here on the left side of the frame, right on my first intermediate tick. So I'll go over the frame, under the frame, over the line, under the frame, under the line. I'm not worried about pulling that tight. I'm just going to pull it all through so that I can see again my Lark's Head or girth hitch knot. Then I'll go back, get that pulled nice and tight, pull all the slack through, and I'll move my spring clamp over to the left side, and I'll take a little break. So that was step 3, a Lark's Head left. Step 4 is going to be a front tie on the left side. Just like our right side front tie, it's going to happen on the outside of the frame, so at our outermost intermediate tick that we laid. We'll start by going over the main line, and we're going to go all the way around the main line. So we go down in front, up here to the rear. It's a little bit tight working in here and also a little bit counterintuitive. On the right side here, our front tie went from right to left. On the left side, you might think that it would go from left to right, but in fact it does the exact same as the right side one. It goes from right to left. So as I come up here, I'll need to come up here to the left. So I need to leave a little bit of space, and I'll bring my line up to the left of this previous strand, creating a little twist here. And I said I want my front tie to be right here against the edge of the frame, but because the rest of the front tie all needs to fit into the left, I do need to leave a little bit of space. So I won't pull it too tight to the left side of the frame, just leaving a little under an inch of space there. Then I'll go up over the front crossbar, under the front crossbar. I'll come under the main line, and again, this is where it's a little bit tricky of where to come up. You're coming up in this tiny little space to the left of this strand. So it makes these left front ties a little bit more confusing than the right side ones. We pull all that through, go back up over the front crossbar again, and then just hold there underneath. And again, this is the spot where you don't want to pull and deflect this main line. So I want it just tight enough, just to the point where I'm about to deflect the line, but I haven't. And then I'll get my clamp so I can take a break. And I will do the same spirals I did on the right side here, and they'll actually spiral in the same direction. So I'll come up to the left, go down to the right. Come up to the left, down to the right, up to the left, down to the right a third time. And this time when we come up to the left, it's going to be to the rear of this main line, so it's going to be again in that tiny little hole that we've been working out of. I'll come up there, and then I'll finish with one more pass around the main line. So I'll go down in front of the main line, and then come back up to the rear of the main line one more time in that tiny hole. There we go. So that's our front tie done. That's step 4 done. And that's what I call the front tie block. And it is simply 2 front ties separated by 2 Larks heads. The rear tie block is basically the same thing. It's going to be 2 rear ties separated by a couple of Larks heads as well. So 8 steps sounds like a lot of steps for the pattern, but actually they're very easy. We're going to do 2 front ties separated by Larks heads, and then 2 rear ties separated by Larks heads. And we'll repeat. So here we go, we're coming to step 5, which is a rear tie on the right side. Our front ties started with the right one, and then we finished with the left one. Our rear ties are the same way. We do the right one first, and then the left one. The difference is the rear ties will work from the inside out, whereas the front ties work from the outside towards the center. So I'm coming right here, right beside my previous rear tie, just to the right of it. When I come down, I'll pass 2 different types of strands. Ignore this first little bit, which is part of the front tie. So we'll just come up in front of that and consider that just part of finishing up our front tie. So on our pass, the first strand, the 2 strands we encounter are this one running horizontally and this one running up and to the right. They're not parallel lines, so they're different types of strands, and we'll treat them differently. And we always go over the first type we encounter. So we go over first, so we're going to go over this horizontal, and then we'll go under the second type we encounter, which is this up and to the right. We should only ever encounter 2 of our 3 types of strands. We have up and to the right, up and to the left, and horizontal strands, and we should only ever hit 2 of the 3 types. If you're passing a horizontal and then an up and left and then an up and right, something is going on with your weave. So I go over first, under second, and then I'm back here at the rear crossbar. We always go over the crossbar, so I'll go over the crossbar. And rear ties, as I mentioned earlier, they always come back up to the left of the strand. So I'll come back up here to the left. We want to pull this nice and tight, so I wrap my hand, grab a hold of the frame there, get it into position on my intermediate tick, and then I'll get my clamp on it. And I can let go, and then I do another twist, so just down here on the right and up here on the left to give it one more twist. Okay, it wants to lay, you might find yours is lying very, very close, or maybe even sort of on top of the previous strand, but as we pull it tight later, that'll give it the correct spacing. So don't worry about that now. The rest of the weave will fix that up. That is step 5, a rear tie right. It's done. So step 6 is a Lark's Head on the right side. This is where things start to get a little bit confusing. The basic 8-step pattern is pretty easy to remember, but it's all these little exceptions that start to make things more complicated. So in the rear, the 2 Lark's Heads in the rear tie block, so steps 6 and step 7, they will tie in to the previous Lark's Heads. And by that I mean I'll come up, instead of going straight to the frame to start my Lark's Head, you can see if I try to do that, when I pull tight, my line will just want to collapse. So I will basically redirect my line off the previous Lark's Head. To do that, I'll just go down here in front of that Lark's Head, and then I'll come up to the rear of the Lark's Head. I just come up as well to the left of this previous strand. So I went down in front of the previous Lark's Head, and then up to the rear of it and to the left of itself. And now I can go over to the frame to tie the Lark's Head. So that just helps to keep this third Lark's Head from wanting to slide down the frame. We tied it into the Lark's Head in front of it. So now I'll proceed with the Lark's Head. I go over the frame, under the frame, over the line, under the frame, and under the line. And then I go back to pull that nice and tight. And clamp it to take a break. That was step 6, Lark's Head right. And on my little list there, I've got an asterisk because we want to remember to tie it into the Lark's Head above it. Now we'll come over to step 7, Lark's Head on the left side. En route, we're going to pass 2 different types of strands, a couple of upright strands and a couple of up left strands. These 2 strands, they're parallel, they're the same, we treat them the same, so we'll go over both of them. Then we run into strands that are different. That's these up left. They're different from the uprights. They're not parallel to them, but they are parallel to each other, so we'll treat them differently. We'll go under them, but we'll go under both of them because they're both the same. So we went over 2 and we went under 2. And that principle of treating like strands alike and different strands differently will hold true. And if you can get that figured out, then when we get into the more complex weaving here in the center, you'll have a much easier time. Over 2, under 2, and then we'll do a Lark's Head here on the left side of the frame. That's step 7, almost done. Before we head down to step 8 here at the rear crossbar, we're going to tie in to the Lark's Head in front of it. So again, it's just as simple. Pass the line down in front of the Lark's Head and pass it up to the rear of the Lark's Head in front. And I always come up to the left of itself. And now we're ready to come straight down to the rear crossbar. We go over the crossbar, we always go over the crossbar. And as we come around the crossbar, the rear ties always come up to the left. So I'm coming up to the left of itself. Pull that nice and tight. Get it with the clamp. Give it an extra wrap. So I went down to the left, up to the right. And that's it. One complete rotation around the shoe. We did 2 front ties separated by 2 Larks heads, and then we did 2 rear ties also separated by 2 Larks heads, and that's our pattern. We'll repeat that pattern, but as we get more and more strands, things will start to get a little bit more complicated. So let's come back up to start our next round.